right, the big question here is, does Matt Walsh have the right to exist at the Daily Wire after posting this video, which says that Israel does not have the right to exist? He's probably going to say something really stupid, but hey, at least it's a different opinion here. Matt Walsh, what do you think about Israel's right to exist?
I don't think that Israel has the right to exist. I don't think that any country has the right to exist. I don't think there's any country that we can look at and say they have a right to exist. And let me explain what I mean by that.
All right. Actually, I'm going to explain this first because I think I know what he's going to get wrong here. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of rights. You can go back to 1946 and have the normative discussion of whether or not Israel should have the right to exist. That has nothing to do with whether or not in 2025 Israel does have the right to exist. A right is exogenously enforced. It's not an endogenous, isolated thing. Other powers grant certain sovereigns the right to exist. Like, think about the right to vote. Women did not have the right to vote before the 19th Amendment. After the 19th Amendment, an exogenous institution, the United States government, granted them that right. So rights always, and it's always a legal thing, it's never a moral thing, always have to be enforceable. You have to be able to cash it in with the powers that be, right? Rights have to be enforced by someone. And the right of Israel to exist is currently enforced by the UN, China, Russia, United States, everyone in Europe. So all these countries say Israel has the right to exist. They all say Israel does not have the right to the West Bank. They all say Israel does not have the right to commit war crimes in Gaza. So it's all about who is exogenous and what do they say. And that is usually the UN or international law. So I don't know what he's going to say.
First, I think you have to define your terms, not to be pedantic, but in this case, it's not. What do we mean by right? We really got to, this is a word that comes up a lot in our debates about any topic. Any topic.
A right is really anything that's legally substantive. So it's not only the Constitution. If I fall in a certain tax bracket, I have a right to Medicaid because I can cash that in with the government that has coercive power over me. I can't establish my own rights. If we're talking about establishing your own rights, that's extremely nonsensical. That means you either are strong enough to fight everyone else to get the health care that you need, or to fight everyone else to get the vote that you want. That's not what a right is. So I have no idea how he's going to make this argument.
It always comes back to someone making a rights claim. I have a right to this, I have a right to that. But what do you mean by that? What does that mean? And I think very often the people that are talking about it, using the term, I have a right to it, they really have if you were to ask them, what do you mean you have a right to it? Like, where do you get that right? Where does that come from? They wouldn't be able to tell you. So to me,
it's pretty much the easiest question of all time. You get rights from, again, an exogenous source of power, someone with a monopoly of force, or consensus, international consensus, like the UN, which does not have a monopoly of force, but de facto a monopoly of force does say Israel has the right to exist and enforces that right actively.
I think the word right means an entitlement. That's what a right is. You are entitled to something. I have a right to...
That's the most circular definition. For the guy who goes around asking people what a woman is and criticizing their definition as people, struggle to come up with the correct thing to say when asked, how is the word woman used in normal discourse? It's a hard thing to establish, by the way. That's one of the worst definitions I've ever heard. Entitlement? So that just means right. Because someone has to entitle you as something. You have to go to an exogenous source and say, hey, I'm entitled to this per the code or the laws that you have set forth. That's what it is. So, we can grant Israel the entitlement to exist. It doesn't really matter as long as someone's enforcing it.
Something means I am entitled to it. And when we say right, if we don't mean entitled, then I don't know what we mean. So if you object to my definition of right, then you got to tell me what yours is, because as far as I can tell, that's what we mean. When someone talks about right, when someone says they have a right to something, they're saying they are entitled to it. So, for example, and you can be entitled to things like if you have a contract with your employer, let's say, you have a right to the compensation outlined in your contract. You have a right to it. You are entitled to it. Those words mean the same thing. You can rightfully say, I'm entitled to that. I have a right to that. And it's not just about contracts. My kids have a right to be cared for by me, fed, protected. They are entitled to that. They have a right to it. They are entitled.
Okay, so if you know that, you should be able to come up with a better definition of rights. What you're saying is the law, the things that are enforced by law.
To it, both legally and morally and spiritually and in every other sense.
Again, you can't say moral rights. Moral rights is a very weird thing to say. Women in Iran do not have the same rights as women in America. That is a factual statement. If you're going to say rights are this moral, esoteric thing in the ether that exists in all of us, natural rights or rights given by God, you'd have to say like women everywhere have the same rights, and that's just factually not true. Everyone has the same free speech rights in the world. Like that statement just sounds insane because it's not true. It's not describing anything useful.
We have rights outlined in the Bill of Rights. We're entitled to that. Protection against unreasonable search and seizures, the ability to own firearms, and so on. We are entitled to that as Americans. Well, and the word entitled gets a bad rap because people are constantly claiming they're entitled to things that they aren't actually entitled to. We spend billions of dollars on entitlements in this country, and not a single cent of entitlement spending actually goes to people who are entitled to what they're getting. Nobody is entitled to receive.
That has to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. What makes them not entitled to it? They got it. They can appeal to a higher source of power and say, you passed a law that makes me entitled to this. What the heck else does entitlement mean? What do you think enforces the entitlement that is given in any contract? What do you think enforces the entitlement that your children have to you? Because you're going to be charged with abandonment or abuse if you do not care for your children or neglect. That's an enforced entitlement.
Anything through our entitlement programs, even though we call it that. We shouldn't call it that. So that's the confusion. But people can be entitled to certain things, and those are their actual real rights. Okay, so then what does it mean for a country to be entitled to exist? Well, I don't know what that means. I truly don't.
Other countries have to entitle them or grant them the right to exist. This is what borders are. Borders mean nothing endogenously, as I keep saying. Borders have to be recognized by the people outside the borders, most importantly. That's what borders are. Recognized by people who do not live within them. That's what makes them borders. Right? If borders just exist in the imagination of the people within them, then it does not matter. There is no separation between them and the next country.
Entitled based on what? The only way that any country has ever come into existence, ever, is through force. There are no exceptions to this rule on the planet, and there never have been, and there never will be. No country exists unless it has forced its own existence violently. And
you could say there's been partitions where both sides have had incentives. But yes, force is definitely involved. Most borders are armistice lines. This is true. It has nothing to do with rights. If we're just going off of a right to exist based on if your military is big enough to establish your borders that nobody else recognizes, that's not a right. You either do exist at that point or you don't. Nobody's guaranteeing your right to exist, so it's nonsense to say you do have a right to exist. You don't, because nobody outside recognizes your right to exist. I don't know how this is so hard to understand.
No country continues to exist unless it continues to insist on its own existence through force, through violence. The very idea that any country, any nation, that the political entity of a nation is entitled to exist is incoherent. It makes no sense.
I'm in Sheikh Radwan, a neighbourhood of Gaza City that used to be a bustling residential area.
You know, I make this point about the Native Americans all the time. That you often hear people who are on the pro-Israel side, they'll say that, well, Israel's the only country where that has to justify its own existence. Right? It's the only country where people has to constantly justify its own existence. Well, every time I hear that, I think, well, have you ever heard of America? What are you talking about? We're built on stolen land. We hear that all the time. We heard it at the Grammys. I mean, we hear it all the time. We have policies.
Well, that's not in modern discourse. The thing is, there are large powers who would like to kind of usurp the status quo, right? Even though Israel does have legitimate borders at this point, called the Green Line, not the borders that many people in the Israeli body politic would like to have. Those do exist. So I don't know. And yes, many people like Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas would like to overthrow that international law, the fact that the UN recognizes Israel. That discussion is not being had with America. I would definitely disagree with them. I think it would cause more turmoil than any good it would produce. And Israel is a part of international law at this point. It's just misbehaving very badly is the main problem. So yes, they do have to justify their own existence to more of an audience than any other country, I would say.
Laws that have been based on that idea in some places. We have an entire major political party that professes that, and at least tries to advance policies and everything based on that idea. But my whole response to that is that, you know, the idea that the natives in the New World were entitled to remain permanent owners over this entire hemisphere is ridiculous. They only claimed ownership in the first place through an act of sheer force, through violence, and what does that mean? It means that they killed and conquered in order to claim this in the first place. And does that mean that okay, then no one is allowed to ever conquer them?
This is really dumb because one of the best accomplishments of humans has been ending this logic, right? It's been saying, yes, all borders are made from killing and conquering, but at some point, namely World War II is when this happened, that has to stop. The buck has to stop with someone. And that is why our world is so much more peaceful than it was in the 19th century or the 17th century or the 18th century, when we had all these empires, abominations of self-determination, no representation, constant conquering, land theft, economic theft, slavery. This is what happens when you use the might is right moral code and legal code. So that is literally what Matt Walsh is advocating. Nobody is saying that we should have never came to America or anything. There was no centralized power here to tell us not to come. So I think it's totally fine that we landed here, but you could have treated many Native Americans a lot better, at the very least. And guess what? If there is Native American tribes who are doing things that we would deem crimes against humanity, then there's no problem in disbanding that power dynamic and saying you can't be a tribe anymore if you keep ripping people's hearts out. So it's not like liberals want the Native American situation to be dead in the water. It's a sunk cost at this point, so it's a little bit silly to talk about it. But in the modern day, we would not do anything like this, and for good reason. A lot of them died because of this and because of what we did.
So they conquer it, and then they could say, well, we're entitled to have this forever. Yeah, we used violence to take it, but no one's allowed to use violence to take it from us. That would be infringing on our rights. What? How does that make any sense? That's not the way it works. They claimed ownership through force. They had to defend it through force. They tried, they couldn't, and history played out the way that it was inevitably going to play out. You know, if you as a nation are able to support and defend yourself, then you can exist.
A big part of that is the Native Americans were in a nation like we think of nations. It was very decentralized. So again, there's nothing to appeal to At some point, lands need centralized powers, governing authorities to rule over them, or else it's just chaotic and serves the best interests of no one. If America was already a settled place by the Native Americans, then we would have to stay in Europe, right? If they had a legal system and a culture and borders and sovereignty, recognized sovereignty by some international law, then why the heck would we think we could come over here and assert our military dominance? There's a reason why invading Greenland and Canada and Mexico and Venezuela sound insane to us. We don't operate on those standards anymore. And it was more acceptable, by the way. So I have a little bit of a relativist take here, more acceptable back when there was not an established power. Definitely not acceptable right now when we have clear-cut international law, a UN, and all of these countries who are willing to recognize borders.
If you as a nation cannot support or defend yourself, then you have no right to exist. You're not even a real country. And I apply this logic to every country on earth. And when people say, well, would you apply it to America? Absolutely. If the United States ever got to a point where it could not exist without the protection and patronage of some other nation, then the United States would have no right to exist at that point. In fact, the United States would already not exist. Dave.
No. Do you think Europe would just invade us? So many countries that are recognized by the UN, so many UN member states cannot defend their own country. If there was going to be a hostile takeover, the only reason there is no hostile takeover is because of nations like ourselves, like the United States, our USAID dollars, who actively enforce their right to exist, which does objectively exist. And they are real countries in every sense of the word. Matt Walsh has a big problem with language and definitions and deciding what words mean. He doesn't understand that words are supposed to mean something that everyone can understand, can adopt a mutual understanding so we can actually communicate. Saying that a country that can't defend itself isn't a real country is completely useless and also dumb and also wrong.
We were in some kind of dystopian future where China basically it owns the United States and we exist at their pleasure, that we don't exist anymore. We already don't exist. And
apply this to human rights. This is what I was saying.